So I want to welcome everyone to the Creatives Roundtable 60 event, Grow Your Business with Virtual Assistants, featuring Maddy Osman. The CR is an online community of creative business owners focused on making our businesses a priority with moderated monthly groups, a closed Facebook group, and these special events that we do once a month. The closed Facebook group is free through the end of June. If anyone's interested, you can go to creatives with an S, roundtable.com, and I'll put it in the link in the chat. And you have to actually fill out an application to be admitted to the Facebook group. Registration for the monthly moderated groups is going to start in May. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to that same website. The current groups end in June and new sessions begin in July. A little bit about our speaker. Maddy Osman is a SEO strategist who works with clients like AAA, Automatic, Kinsta, and Sprout Social. Maddy's going to teach us how she grew her business to 6 figures as a direct result of hiring virtual assistants. I will put Maddy's links in the chat as well. I'm going to ask everyone to mute themselves, and Maddy, you can take it away.
Sounds good. So I'm just going to share my screen. Give me just a moment to get that figured out. Can you guys all see my slides here? Actually, I'm going to do it not full screen. Can you guys can see? Just like a nod. I'm not sure if there's something going on with my Zoom video right now. Can you guys hear me and see everything? Okay, yeah, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to keep it in this view because I have some notes on the side that I want to reference just to make sure that I'm giving you guys all the best information here. I'm not going to go too much into what I do, just to add that I've been freelancing full-time for, I think it's been about 5 or 6 years now, and I have done some freelancing before that part-time, but it wasn't until I took this time that I started to look into what it might look like to work with virtual assistants and how that could help my business. So let's skip ahead to why I work with a virtual assistant. It was actually a mentor of mine when I first started working this business that suggested it to me. He was thinking about starting to work with some virtual assistants in his business. So it wasn't really until somebody else had introduced that concept to me that I really started to think about it as a possibility for my business. And I think a lot of people are like that. It's not until you see someone sort of successfully model, that successfully working out that you start to see it as. Definitely, it can feel overwhelming to think about hiring people, adding them to your business, and then having expenses associated with that, having extra work associated with giving them guidance. But it's something that can definitely help you to increase your capacity, because ultimately what you're doing as a freelancer or a business owner or whatever, even an employee, is you're selling your time. And I want to jump back for just 1 second to this Tim Ferriss book. So Tim Ferriss wrote this book called The 4-Hour Workweek, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with and have maybe even read. It's definitely a good sort of blueprint for what it's like to start working with virtual assistants and to delegate tasks. So I definitely recommend it if after this presentation you're feeling inspired and want to dig a little bit deeper into it. And I'll have some resources at the end that can also help you dig deeper into this topic. But really, ideally, you don't want to be busy all the time. You want to be productive with the time that you have available. And so that's what a virtual assistant ultimately enables you to do. So talking about time, you have a limited amount of it available. You have to sleep, hopefully. You want to have time to eat. You maybe want to get in a shower every day. You want to spend time with your family. You want to do stuff that's not work too. So that leaves a very minimal window of time available to actually do work. And you also have to think about things like if you're ever sick, you know, you lose productivity on that day. If you ever want to take vacation, which hopefully we all want to do someday when we're able to again, you know, there's time associated with the administrative aspects of your business. There's time associated with tasks that you don't personally have to do that are, you know, not of a high value that you could hire other people to do. And so ultimately you want to be thinking about what are the things that only I can do or that I do best, you know, compared to other people, you know, who run their own businesses. How can I find more time to focus on those specific tasks? And, you know, the other thing to think about too is how can you create a situation where you can still make a profit when you're delegating these tasks that you don't necessarily have to do. And that's kind of going to be a theme throughout this, but working with virtual assistants can help to then increase your capacity on a daily basis on those days where you're sick or on vacation, or maybe you're just having a really bad day. And as long as you've gotten ahead of, you know, giving your virtual assistants things to do, you can still have productive days for your business. So one thing that comes to mind in terms of increasing capacity are things like if you're, you know, scheduling social media for your brand, or if you offer that as a client service. That's not something that I need to do if I can create a process for somebody else to follow. And then, you know, the other thing to focus on is using virtual assistants to be able to spend more hours on billable work versus admin work. So they help to increase your capacity for that billable work. They also help to keep your business running behind the scenes. I've kind of already talked about that in terms of like vacation and sick days type things. But then another thing to think about in working with virtual assistants is they can also make it easier to handle client emergencies. And, you know, you might be working with your virtual assistant to help to attack some of these rush orders. You know, you might be able to get their help day of if something comes up. And so it's a lot easier. Either, you know, they might be handling work so that you can focus on that emergency, or they might be helping you to handle that emergency by taking pieces of that task you to serve this client who needs you right now, probably make a little bit of extra money because it's a rush order, and ultimately just keep things running smoothly. But in order to figure out if a virtual assistant is going to work for you, you first kind of have to take a step back and think about just what different types of employment situations there are and what makes the most sense for your business. So in general, just before going into like the distinction between a 1099 contractor and like a full-time or part-time employee, think about this fact, which is just that virtual assistants can save you money compared to the traditional hiring process. So the reason for that involves things like you're not going to have to pay payroll tax on their behalf, which you would have to do with a full or part-time employee. You're not required to provide benefits, but it's also things like, you know, if they're virtual, you're not working with them in person. So that means you can save expenses associated with like office costs, unless of course you're already, you know, having those expenses, or, you know, things like materials, because they're working virtually and because you can specify on whatever, you know, like job, like hiring job description type things that they have a computer, you know, that's a requirement. That's not something that you have to then also pay for yourself. You know, there are certain situations where when you're onboarding a virtual assistant and you require that they use certain tools, then it's kind of on you to assume the expenses associated with that unless you work out some other sort of deal. But when it comes to sort of like these base expenses that are associated with having like a traditional employee, virtual assistants kind of save you from a lot of those things. But let's look at kind of a comparison between the different types of help that you could hire for your business. So again, we have like the full-time or part-time employee I just want to say I'm not a lawyer, so whatever I say is not legal advice, but a full-time or part-time employee is usually someone who you're defining the working conditions around. So you're saying like, you need to show up at this time, you need to report here. You're, creating sort of conditions around their workday. So a subcontractor or a 1099 employee is really a different distinction, because you can set due dates, you can require that they use certain tools, and you can sort of dictate some nature of their workday, but you can't say, I need you to be online from this time to this time. I need you to respond to me from this time to this time. You can create guidelines, but you have to be very careful with towing this line between, letting people do work the way that they want to do it versus, dictating how they do it, because then, you get into an issue with the IRS where they're going to classify that person as an employee, even if you haven't. And then you might, then owe back taxes and things like that if they audit you and they determine that you're misclassifying people. So it's very important to have the right classification for employees versus contractors. But in general, as long as you're not dictating the conditions that they work under and the times that they're available, then usually you're in the clear. My suggestion for anybody who's unclear about what person should be classified as what is to look for your local small business advisory center. It's a free resource that anyone in a major city will have access to. And a lot of them are doing, virtual meetings right now. If, for example, you sign up to get help from a SCORE mentor, that's another free resource that a local small business advisory center would have, and just ask, this is what I'm looking for in terms of working with this person. Am I going to, get in trouble with that? So use your resources. If you have, a lawyer on retainer or whatever, then you just use them. But if you need some free help to figure this out, that's an awesome resource. And then I kind of talk about contractors and virtual assistants. They're really the same thing, but you can make a distinction there if you want. So a subcontractor, or like a 1099 contractor, usually is some sort of specialized worker who helps you tackle parts of projects. So like when a business hires a freelancer, it's usually for a specific thing. They want help with marketing, or some other aspect of business that can't be handled in-house or that isn't currently handled in-house. For me, a virtual assistant is a little bit more about helping with like ongoing research tasks, maybe like admin stuff. We're going to get into a little bit more of the distinction between the types of tasks that you might outsource to them, but just think about them as helping you also tackle lots of projects, but it's usually more of an ongoing thing, and it's a little bit less specialized. They're kind of like a catch-all for any sort of help that you might need in your business that you can find a way to delegate to them. So also a 1099 contractor would be obviously someone who works in the US, whereas a virtual assistant doesn't necessarily have to. And there's no reason why you can't look outside of the US to get help with whatever you need, assuming that, there are capable people who can, address whatever it is you need help with. So let's talk a little bit about where you can find a great VA, or virtual assistant. There's three sort of groups of places that I would recommend just based on my personal experience. And that's not to say that you won't find awesome VAs in other places too. This is just where I'm going to focus on right now. So the first one is Onlinejobsph. This is a place where I have gone personally to find two long-term VAs that I've worked with for the past several years. So Onlinejobsph is a marketplace that refers specifically to workers in the Philippines. It's people that have a slightly lower cost of living. You might have to deal with your own inner struggle with, sending money and work overseas versus, working with people in the US. In my business, I work with a very diverse mix of people. It's, I think, primarily people that work in the US, but I have some people that also I work with internationally, and not just, Filipino workers, but also people in the UK and, in Europe and different countries. So for me, I like to think global. I think it's really a personal preference. But Onlinejobsph works where you just pay like a monthly subscription fee. Last time I checked, it was like $50 a month. You don't have to do it every single month. You could just do 1 month at a time, which is honestly what I do because I need new help fairly infrequently at this point. But you put together a job description, you post what you need. Even though it is a platform working with people who have a lower cost of living than what we're used to in the US, my recommendation to you, if you use this service, is to go above and beyond what the sort of like average hourly rate you're seeing is for the types of tasks that you need help with, because that will attract a much better candidate. And it's also important to, when you're hiring people from any of these job boards, really, is to be talking about, like a quarterly, yearly, monthly, whatever works for you, review process where this person can, be eligible to receive higher pay. Because at the end of the day, just like as with working with employees, if you want someone to work with you long term, you've got to give them incentive to do so. So just because it seems like the cheapest option, one of my VAs that I've been working with for several years makes as much as like some of the people that I work with in the US, because she's earned it, because she's done a really great job, and I want to keep her around. I don't want to lose her. So it's important to think about that. It's not just about finding cheap help. It's about finding help that you can afford, but then allowing them to grow as you grow, as they help you grow. So another place where you might not think you can find a lot of really like quality people to help you out with is Craigslist. I have hired several people to help me from Craigslist who have lasted a long time, up to now. There's one person I found on Craigslist that I've been working for probably 2 or 3 years now. And it used to be free. Now you have to pay, I think, $5 per post, which is still pretty negligible in the grand scheme of things. And my tip for Craigslist is to post the pay rate. You don't want to be messing around with, people that are just in a completely different ballpark in terms of what they want to be paid. Again, you have to think about, supply and demand and coming up with a great offer that brings out great people. But, you can certainly find someone who's affordable for your business, whatever, that looks like in terms of what you're willing to pay as an hourly rate. My other Craigslist tip for success is, even though you're probably looking for someone remote, I have posted in multiple major markets on Craigslist, not just the one that's most local to me. So like I would post in Denver, but I'd also post in like New York, Chicago, LA, things like that, because that'll give you a wider pool of talent. It's going to be $5 a post, but money well spent in terms of creating a great pool of talent to pick from. And then there's like the Fiverrs and the Upworks of the world. I don't have a whole lot of experience with Upwork from either side, freelancer or client. But my understanding is Upwork is kind of more like one-off projects that you can, keep rehiring someone for. I guess it's kind of the same on Fiverr, but it's a little bit more straightforward on Fiverr to just go to somebody's gig and say, oh, that's exactly what I need, and then buy it. You don't even necessarily have to communicate with that person prior to buying it. Whereas Upwork is a little bit more back and forth, sort of negotiating to figure out like what works for both people. I think that both of those marketplaces are probably better for sort of one-off specialized tasks than necessarily for finding an ongoing virtual assistant, although that's not to say that you couldn't do that there. So, and I actually have, at the end of these slides, there's a link to an article that I put together for how to offer your own services on Fiverr. Actually, a lot has changed since it's first come out. You don't have to offer services starting at $5 an hour anymore. And it has a little bit of some tips for delegating work to Fiverr as well. So if you grab the link to the slides, you'll be able to check that out and see if that's something that you want to explore a little bit further. But let's talk next about some of the types of tasks that you might delegate to your virtual assistant. Actually, I want to take one step back really quick. to give you one more place that you can find, I'm on the wrong place, where you could find a virtual assistant, which is Facebook groups for, you know, whatever your industry is, or just like places where people hang out that might be like your clients or things like that. But going to Facebook groups and saying, hey, I'm looking for a virtual assistant to help with, you know, this, here's the pay rate. Instead of leaving it open-ended though, to just say like, hey, if you're somebody who can do this, like, let me know. It's better to get recommendations from other people. Otherwise you're going to have a lot of stuff to sort through. So it's kind of better to let somebody else speak to, you know, how great a virtual assistant is versus just like leaving it open in one of those groups to just like let anybody submit themselves. So just kind of like a minor distinction to keep in mind. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about how to delegate tasks. And I have a framework to keep in mind. Okay, so we have a question to clarify: subcontractors and VAs both receive 1099s, correct, since both are paid unless under $600. So it depends. If your VA is domestic US, then yes, they're the same as a 1099 contractor. If it's somebody who's in another country, you don't have to fill out a 1099 for them, because, you know, that's kind of up to their own country's way of managing money and stuff like that. So back to this task delegation framework, you're going to want to delegate tasks that are time consuming, low value, or that are specialty or occasional services. So time consuming to me is anything that requires a lot of research. One example I could share that's not work related, but that relates to protecting the time you have available is, like, say for example, you're researching a trip that you want to take so that you can take some time off your business. And you know, certainly you could go through yourself and consider all the different sites and, you know, pick out a hotel and book your flights and all that good stuff. But the great thing about working with a virtual assistant is, you know, they don't just have to do business tasks. They could help with stuff like this too, and, you know, work to put together some options for you. Or you could say, you know, I'm looking for a hotel that, like, you know, has laundry services and it's like a long-term stay and it has this many beds and blah, 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 and whatever. And they can help you to at least narrow it down, and, you know, based on what your specific things that you're looking for might be. So, you know, not a business example, but something that can help you to take time away from your business. So any sort of like research tasks, low value would be something that's not like personally fulfilling and not something that you need to do. So I talked about like scheduling social media posts. For me, like, that's something. Or another thing that I've outsourced to my virtual assistants is creating Pinterest pictures that like are formatted well for specifically Pinterest for any new blog posts that I publish. I also have completely outsourced to my VAs my Pinterest posting strategy. So they handle all of that, you know, posting, like using like Tailwind, for example, and like sharing content in tribes so that like other people will share it as well. But just, yeah, handling like all the minute details of my social strategy, minus like the content creation. I have a 1099 contractor who's local, actually in Denver, which is where I'm from, who handles that aspect of it for me. But then it kind of creates this nice chain of, I have one person who handles creative, one person who handles scheduling, and then all I have to do is kind of like approve it and look over it. But I don't have to do all that work myself, and it saves me so much time every week, and I can just focus on my core business stuff. So then talking about like specialty or occasional services, the best example is like tax prep. I'm not a CPA, and I certainly want to lower my risk of getting audited. So I have a CPA do my taxes every year. I also have them do my bookkeeping throughout the year, because to me, that's a low value task. It's kind of also a specialty service. Another thing might be like setting up Facebook ad campaigns. That's a specialty service where I could probably do it. I could probably teach myself and, you know, stay up to date with all the like daily, weekly, monthly changes. But I really just like don't have space in my brain for that. So something like that, I would want to outsource to someone else. And it would probably be, it would either be like a contractor or a firm even, or, you know, maybe someone on Fiverr who's like a pro at whatever that very specific task has to be. So getting a little bit more granular, you can think about delegating tasks in terms of things like the stuff you hate doing. So like bookkeeping, I really hate doing it. I could do it. I know how to do it, but I just don't want to do it. You know, researching parts of a project and having a VA do research for you. Like one of the best benefits of that is it just tees you up for the time when you need to then get involved, and it takes some of that initial like stress out of getting a certain task done. Also things like admin and client facing tasks. So things like, this is more of like a long-term thing when you have a VA that you really trust, but like, you know, helping you schedule meetings with clients, or, you know, helping you with email follow-ups. Think of them like an executive assistant, like the types of things that they would do. All great stuff to delegate when you found someone that you really trust. Even like cleaning up your inbox, like deleting like newsletters you're never going to read, or unsubscribing from stuff. I don't think I'm at the point yet where I can let someone completely do that for me, but something to think about if you're willing to, you know, give up a little bit of control to save your sanity. So we talked about research, and admin and client facing tasks. So then specialized tasks, we kind of talked about this, but, you know, like another thing might be like setting up my MailChimp account for different automations, or like I write blog content, but I outsource the editing because I know that I'm never going to catch all my own mistakes. You know, the other thing about specialized tasks, actually, I've already talked about this, but, you know, it's just like you have limited brain capacity. And while it's fun to learn new things, I love learning new things. I love learning more about different sides of marketing. I just have limited space in my brain for all of it. And then, you know, the ongoing upkeep of staying up to date and, you know, being able to just like execute on the different things I want to do. There's just certain things where it's not going to be worth my time. And so ultimately it's better to find someone else to help me with. And even if it's a little bit more, you know, expensive to have somebody else do that, the benefit is that you don't have to spend your time to get up to speed. And so ultimately there is like a savings of your brain, your sanity, and all that stuff, even if, you know, it kind of hurts to pay somebody else to do it, but you have to think about it from that perspective. Another thing that you can outsource in kind of a, you know, funky way is sales. And what I mean specifically is thinking about in terms of like automating stuff, thinking about like creating like an affiliate program, for example, where it's not like a traditional, you know, salesperson model, because you might not be ready to do that in your business yet, but finding a way to sell your services where, you know, somebody else is helping you to do that. And this works best if you have a productized service like a course or like an ebook or something like that. But that's not to say that you couldn't create an affiliate program for your own services, you know, if you had some sort of like e-commerce checkout functionality where you'd be able to track that. So, you know, this isn't something that I would traditionally associate with using a VA, but it is part of outsourcing and, you know, being more purposeful with your time. Oh, and Nancy brought up a good point, which is if you do work with a 1099 contractor, absolutely get that W-9 filled out before they start to work with you, because you're going to need that at the end of the year anyway. It's part of like, you know, your auditable document stack. So whenever I work with a new contractor, that's part of it. If they're in the US, I also have everybody sign an NDA. And then once we get to the point where we're working together, then I also have them sign an agreement that just agrees to kind of like the scope of how we're working together. Like, here's your pay rate. This is like what your like main duties are. You know, you'll also have to probably get like their address and stuff for some of these forms to fill them out to like a legal compliance standpoint. But let's talk about some delegation basics, because once you've found a VA and figured out what you want to delegate to them, it helps to have sort of a process for how to do that well. It's certainly one of the hardest parts of being an entrepreneur, letting go and, you know, letting somebody else help you, but it's the most necessary for growing your business, because without this, your time is finite and your ability to create deliverables is finite. So delegation kind of starts during the hiring process, because you're going to want to start with an interview. And then what I always do is I give them a paid test before I fully onboard them into my system. So during sort of like the pre-interview stage, I always ask for some samples, ideally, something that's like a published work, although it really depends on what I'm hiring for at the time. But like anything that they can show me that demonstrates professionalism, that they can follow directions, that they can put together something that looks something like what I'm looking for in terms of what I've hired them to help me with. Honestly, it's best to do an interview over like a video conferencing tool like Zoom, because then you can sort of get to know each other. It's a little bit more easy to see if they're going to be a fit just based on them answering questions in real time. But if you can't do it, if it's a person that you're working with who, maybe can like if they're from the Onlinejobsph marketplace, maybe they can read English and write English, but maybe they can't speak it. In that case, you might want to do an email interview, with the same questions. That's not a bad, secondary approach. What I was going to say in addition to that is you can sometimes ask, if you're working with someone who's not a traditional employee, it kind of opens up the fact that you can ask some additional questions that you wouldn't be able to ask if they were an employee. And so my mentor, who encouraged me to look into, this process of working with virtual assistants, suggested to me that I ask questions about what's their life like outside of work. Do they have anything going on that might be able to, or that might get in the way of turning things in on time? Like, do they have kids? Are their kids at home with them? Do they have other, responsibilities that might, in some way just get in the way? Again, normally you wouldn't be able to ask these questions, but if that's something that's important to you, which I would say deadlines are probably important to all of us, you might want to ask the question. So, and then in terms of like a paid test, so never ask anyone for free work to do like new free work for you. It really irks me in the freelance writing world, which is kind of the main one that I inhabit. I get this stuff all the time. Oh yeah, just, if you could just write a 500-word blog post about this topic, then we'll be able to figure out if you're a fit. It's like, well, I have plenty of published pieces online. People can, certainly figure it out if I'm going to be a fit for them based on that. And I'm happy to also do a paid test for them, but I will not do a free test. And you should never ask somebody else to do free work for you, because, the goal is that you're hiring them to help you grow your business. And so they should have some sort of share in that growth starting from the minute that you hire them. And that's the soapbox that I'm going to die on. So Nancy asked, for the paid test, do you recommend a flat fee or hourly? I've done it both ways. I think a flat fee is better unless you create some sort of rules around like how long it could be, like not to exceed this many hours. Like you can get in touch with me if it's going to take more than that, but like this is my budget for this. So it definitely helps to be very clear about what that fee is going to be and what the limitations of that fee are going to be. Otherwise, that's kind of like the first time that someone could potentially take advantage of you in terms of just, billing whatever they want, because that's the amount that they wanted to make on that. I'm going to share some other tips for how you can kind of, keep billing to a reasonable amount as well. But just to sort of end off on this paid test stuff, you want to run this test with maybe your top 2 or 3 candidates. Don't do it for everyone who applies who seems like a good fit. Really focus on like the people who are probably going to be the ones you hire, or the 2 to 3 contenders for that one spot. And if you have other spots, maybe it's, the top 3 to 4 people or something like that. The paid test is a really good chance to see if there's anything they do that you can't stand, like any non-starters for working with you. For example, if they're late or the work is just really bad, it's really nice to just get that out of the way right now. I would still recommend that you pay the fee that you promised to that person, because that's good business karma, even if it's just like absolute shit work, because you made a deal with them. And it's kind of on you if you didn't provide enough guidance for like the final product that you were looking for. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. And then one thing to keep in mind with the paid test is it might not look 100% like, you know, the sort of deliverables that you want them to help you with in the future, but you have to be reasonable in terms of like, this person doesn't know your business like you do inside and out. They're working off whatever guidelines that you gave them, which may be incomplete. You know, you have to be reasonable in terms of how much time this person is investing in getting to know your business before they even started working for you. So ultimately, what you're looking for is not perfection, but coachability. You're looking for somebody who, you know, clearly followed your directions, even if it didn't necessarily produce the deliverable that you were 100% looking for, but somebody who seems willing to, you know, meet you wherever you're willing to meet them, sort of thing. And then one last thing to talk about with the interview is make sure whatever questions you're asking one person, you're asking everybody else the same questions so that they're standard and so that you can compare them across different people. That's not to say that you can't, you know, interject other questions during the interview, but make sure that like the standard most important ones are phrased the same, like same exact question, asked in the same order, all that. Just, you know, create kind of a little scientific control for that. So once you actually start working with your virtual assistant, you're going to want to create some sort of project management process. It can be really simple. For me, it started with using Todoist and just creating like a project on that for all my contractors to join. And you're looking for, in a project management system, things like commenting functionality, things like the ability to set priorities, because sometimes they'll change. You know, you'll have something that you wanted to get ahead on, but then something that's a little bit more urgent takes precedence, and you want it to be really easy for your contractors if, you know, they have to pick one over the other for that day to say, okay, well, obviously the high priority is the one that I want to work with, and this could wait another day because, you know, we're still this far out from the client due date or something like that. You also want to look for, what's the other thing? You want to be able to obviously, like, you know, assign it to a specific person. If you can assign it to multiple people, that's even better because some projects will have different dependencies and things like that. And then obviously due dates is a big one. So before you decide on whatever your project management tool will be, look through a few of them, maybe even do like a couple trials where you're like duplicating the same task and just seeing like how that works. And then once you do decide on one, create some process documentation that any new hire will be able to reference to get up to speed really fast. And that could be like a written document, maybe with screenshots, or it could be a video walkthrough. And honestly, video is like the easiest way to just get to the point of what you're trying to say. It can be easy to sort of edit yourself when you're writing stuff, but you can get more out when you're on video and you're just doing like a screen share walkthrough of your tool, and then you might remember stuff that you wouldn't if you're just trying to write about it. So right now, my project management tool, and we're going to talk a little bit more about tools at the end, but I use Freedcamp. It's super affordable. It's got a lot of different options. But what I used to use was Todoist. I also used Basecamp in the past. And what's the other one I used? There's some other one I can't remember. Maybe it's at the end. Okay, another thing to keep in mind while you're creating this project management process is you want to create sort of like a central repository of any process documentation that you want them to reference. So this might be things like, and I'm getting some questions about the tools. They're at the end of the deck. So if you have the deck, you can look at them right now. And then if not, I'll go over them very shortly. So in talking about a knowledge base and creating like records of your process management. So some process management documentation for my business, which involves freelance writing and stuff like that, might be like how to find royalty-free images that aren't going to get us in trouble. You know, here's a list of resources for that. Here's what to look for. Here's how to find them on other places. It might be stuff like, here's a style guide that we use for all our clients. So make sure that you're referencing this if you're working on any writing for a client. Here's how we put together outlines, that involve research that I'm hiring you to do. So stuff like that, just so that you don't have to repeat yourself a million times. You document it once and then share it forever, maybe make some updates periodically, but it just saves you time and it sort of empowers your employees to find answers so that they're not always coming to you to figure it out. Other things, so like filming yourself using certain tools. So like I have a video from my contractors of how to use Freedcamp, how to sort of like assign tasks them to themselves, and like how to use social scheduling tools for myself, for clients, like things like that. Again, record once, use forever. It's just an amazing thing. And then the last thing I'll talk about in terms of creating a knowledge base is you can also create like a one-sheeter onboarding document where it's like, here's all the forms you need to fill out. Here's that NDA, that agreement, that 1090 or the W-9 form. Here's the videos I want you to watch and a link to all the videos in your knowledge base. And here's the processes that I want you to become familiar with. And here's the link to all those. So that saved me so much time when hiring contractors, just having like, look here if you're new. And then here's everything else for everyone else ongoing that you can reference before you ask me any questions. And then one last thing, I guess, on this topic is a lot of the processes that I've put together, I've repurposed into Skillshare classes where I'm then like making money whenever people watch those. So, it's not just something that you could create for your business. If you have a really awesome process that other people could benefit from, then, you can also do that and make it even more worth your time. So this is a really important piece. You have to definitely be very clear with deadlines and providing any sort of guidance. Make sure that you've given a deadline from the beginning of our project starting, and making sure that deadline is reasonable, because these people are probably not working for you full time if they're a virtual assistant or a contractor. Maybe they are, but depending on the situation, they're probably fitting your work in around other people's work. And so I like to give my contractors, I aim to give them at least a week turnaround time. Sometimes it's shorter. And if it is significantly shorter, I give them the option to just say, I can't do that. It comes back to treating each other with respect. And then when it comes to providing guidance, definitely give them something to start off of, whether that's like, here are some places where you can start your research, or here's an example of a finished product, whether I made it or somebody else did, that's really close to what I'm looking for. So just taking the time to sort of tee them up will then make it easier for them to provide something for you that doesn't need extensive edits, or, that looks nothing like what you want. So it's your responsibility to be helping them to understand what you want. And the more you give up front, the easier it will be long-term for them to sort of read your mind. So getting to the end here, we're going to talk about a couple tools and resources that I use with my virtual assistants. First one is like a password management tool. LastPass is kind of the industry standard. It's the best one I've found. Other people use like Dashlane. There's other ones out there. But the benefit of doing this is that, like, let's say you either need to give virtual assistants access to like your tools or accounts that, they need access to complete work for you, or potentially client tools or accounts, like for social media, for example. And using like a tool like LastPass allows you to obscure the login details. So they're like encrypted and they don't actually ever see those login details. So if you ever are in a situation where you need to fire that contractor, or they're just moving on, to another job, all you have to do is restrict their access or delete the user. You don't have to go in and change all your passwords. I have all my contractors invoice me through PayPal or QuickBooks for, anybody who uses that. But most people that I work with don't necessarily have like a dedicated invoicing tool. So PayPal is the best because it just creates like a paper trail. I don't necessarily pay them through PayPal. I think there's only one contractor I do right now. But usually for payment, I'm using either Gusto or TransferWise. So TransferWise is for any international workers I work with. It's a much lower cost for them to access their money than PayPal, which takes, 3% and then like a currency conversion fee. And so for any of my international coworkers, that's just like not really fair to them if, there's other options out there. And so I think with TransferWise, it's like maybe they take like $5 out of any like couple $100 payment that I give them. And that's just a much better situation than PayPal could ever be. And with Gusto, so I'm paying myself through Gusto. So I have an account just by nature of I need to pay myself because ideally, if you have a business, you're using some sort of payroll processing tool. It's, the IRS likes it better than you transferring money from one account to another. And then it also makes it so that you're proactively paying your payroll taxes so that you don't have to worry about that later on. And you can add employees and contractors and pay them through that. And so you assume the cost of adding that contractor, which is to the tune of maybe like $6 a contractor per month per active contractor. So if you didn't pay them that month, then you won't, pay for them with your Gusto subscription. But it's just really easy. And then the benefit of using that is like they prepare my W-2, but they also prepare my 1099 forms automatically using that data that they have from me paying them all year. So that's a really nice time savings for you. And it's just nice to have all that stuff in one place. So like I said, I use Freedcamp now. Just because it has so many useful features. It has like a wiki, so I can store any like long-term client project knowledge on there. It also has a discussion board, so I can talk to my contractors about, other like short-term timely things. And then you can comment on the tasks themselves. There's other really cool things. They have their own like password management functionality. I haven't really tested it yet, but I'm really happy with it so far. But I used to use a mix of Basecamp, Todoist, and then Freedcamp also lets you track time. So this is something I don't think I mentioned earlier, but it's really important, at least it has been to me, to have contractors track time every week and then, input like the hours associated with each individual project. It kind of keeps us all accountable, and then it helps me to see if there's any major discrepancies between one week, this type of task, and then this week it's the same task. If it's like an extra couple hours, then I'll ask them about that. So it just creates kind of like a place to have discussions and to say, is there more I need to give you so that you can, do this task more efficiently or something like that. But using a time tracking tool, I absolutely recommend that. And then for an intranet, you could use Google Sites. It's free and easy to use, but I've also included a link at the end here, which some people said it might not be working right now, but it looks like these links are working. So I guess just let me know after the fact if there's a link that's not working for you that you want. You can tweet me at Maddy Osman, which Nancy dropped that in the chat. Anyway, this How to Delegate Complex Topics to Your Team is an article I wrote for Trello about using their tool to create a company intranet and other useful tidbits. So check out these articles if you want to learn a little bit more. Also check out these books. They're going to go like much more in depth about sort of the strategy behind it. Virtual Freedom is by Chris C. Ducker, who has a virtual assistant placement firm where he can help you find them too if you want. But I think using a lot of the tips you found here, you'll be pretty empowered to do it yourself. So with that, that's all I have to say, and I will open it up to any questions that you guys might have. And I'll look through.
If you have questions, if you could raise your hand, that would be appreciated so everyone doesn't talk at once. Kara?
Thanks. That was really helpful and thorough. Have there ever been any tasks that you thought were going to be great to pass off and then ones that weren't, and you're like, oh no, this was a terrible idea, and you had to bring it back to yourself? And kind of what were they and how'd that process go for you?
That's a great question. I don't think that there's ever been a situation where it hasn't benefited me at least partially to send out that task and to get help. I think that what you have to think about is it's not just like the end deliverable. It's all these like little steps that get there, right? So whenever you're thinking about delegating a task, you have to think about it in terms of all the little pieces that make it up, and sort of when you're communicating that to your virtual assistant, be like, okay, so this is the first part, and this is my expectation. Here's the guidelines. Here's what that looks like. And then here's how that fits into this piece. Like, this is why you're doing that. So it's best to just try to connect the dots for people, and to always explain your why. I can't think of a time when it didn't benefit me in some way to delegate something out. And I think the times that it has failed has been a personal failing of mine, to set expectations, or to just be like, this is what it looks like at the end. This is very close to that, or this is what I'm looking for. So, but I would say, challenge yourself to look at those like big things that seem like only you can do it, and think about what are the little parts of that I could definitely get away with having help with.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. Mm-hmm. I have a question, since nobody else is raising their hand. Could you repeat what's on the onboarding doc that you send? You said an NDA, a W-9. What else is on there?
Yeah, let me actually pull it up on my side, and I can tell you guys exactly what it looks like.
Because I do that with clients, but I never thought about doing it with someone who's doing work for me.
Sure. So the forms that I have on the list are an NDA, and I send the NDA before the test assignment, because the test assignment might actually involve some client work that I want them to do. But right. You can make like a fake assignment if you want to. I'm just the type of person who, if I'm going to pay for something, I want to like try to get something out of it that sure. I can use. So I send the NDA first, and then I send just like a basic contractor agreement that says stuff like, here's the pay rate that we've agreed upon. Here's your role. It also goes into like, if you want to quit, I need like written notice. So I ask for 30 days written notice. It talks about stuff like they can't solicit clients for a certain period of time. That's kind of like the main things. It's just like something to protect yourself, but to agree to the scope of work between the two of you, and to sort of like set the stage for what it looks like if you have to part ways.
Okay.
And that's pretty much it as far as forms, besides a W-9. If they're in the US, that's definitely an important one to get out right away. So the other things I have on my like onboarding one sheeter are tools you'll need to use. So download them now or create an account. And so right now I have to update this, but I have listed like, Google Docs we're going to be using, Freedcamp you'll need to create a user account for, in the past Toggle to track your time, make sure you have a PayPal account. So another thing I tell all my new hires is how to invoice me, so that they know exactly what it looks like to get paid for their work. And so they understand what the system is, so that they're not just invoicing me whenever. I try to handle all that sort of like bookkeeping, accounting stuff on one day. So I say, invoice me every Friday and I'll have it paid by Saturday. And you can, define it however you want, but I just wanted them to get consistent, because I would have contractors who would just like hit a certain threshold and then invoice me, or they do it like once a month or something. And I'm like, I want to know what cash flow looks like every single week. So you have to do this if you want to be paid this week. And everybody's been really happy with that, because they know exactly what to expect. There's no question about it. And it just takes away any like uneasiness, I guess, they might have about doing work before getting paid for it. But everybody, I've created a really good reputation with my contractors that they know they're going to get paid every single week. So part of it is just following through on what you say. And then I mentioned like LastPass, download that. And then I have watch these videos and then read these intranet sort of, documentation pieces that refer to what you're going to be dealing with on a daily basis. And so the idea behind this one sheeter is it's going to answer the majority of their questions about working with me, so that we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on that, and so that they can kind of onboard themselves, essentially.
Okay, great. Any other questions? If you don't want to be seen, you can always put them in chat. Going once, going twice. Okay, great. 1:30 on the dot.
That was perfect.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Maddy. I really appreciate it. Everyone will be emailed probably within a week the presentation and a link to the video. There are a bunch of people who were signing on from Europe, so they definitely weren't going to attend, so they get the video, and all the links that were discussed today as well.
Yeah, and if you guys have any questions after the fact, just tweet me or email me. It's just madeline.osman@gmail.com. More than happy to help you figure this stuff out. And I'm thinking in the future, I might go like deeper into the like management process. So, you know, look out for that maybe on Skillshare in the future.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you so much.
To our class, if you want to email them to me, I'll put them in the links as well. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maddy.